Sue, I want to speak with you a little bit about appearances of the Blessed Virgin Mary and concentrate especially on the appearance at Fatima in Portugal in 1917. I'd like to talk to you about these Marian apparitions because your own religious sensibilities are attuned to them. Not everyone has that particular outlook religiously, and I know you have been to Lourdes and have read a lot about the apparitions and studied it and been kind enough to teach some classes for us about it, and so you seem to me to be the perfect person to speak about this whole area. So we're on Fatima and the apparitions of the Blessed Virgin Mary there, and I wondered if you wanted to make some initial comments about the Fatima experience or...
Okay. Basically, I saw a video not too long ago called The Marian Apparitions of the 20th Century, and in finishing it, I was amazed at the number of places where Mary is appearing. Apparently, allegedly, some have been approved, and the first one to be approved in the 20th century, Jim, is the Fatima, Portugal. I'm sure we'll get into that in much more detail, but that was back in 1917. And then into Belgium in the 1930s. Mary was appearing in two places there, in Bering, Belgium, and in Bonneau, under different titles, asking very similar messages, as I think we'll find out when we discuss what are the messages that Mary is asking of us.
So you're on 20th century here. You should remember there's sort of a backdrop to that because already in the 19th century, appearances of Mary began to multiply. We go back to La Salette in 1846 and then to Lourdes in 1858. So there was a lot of interest already in that kind of thing. And it appears as though these various visions always built on preceding ones. They don't seem to happen in total isolation. There's sort of recurring themes and so on.
They're progressive and they're interlocked, as we'll move even further to see some of these others. In the 1960s, during the 40s and 50s, there weren't so many that we know of, although if we don't know about them, doesn't mean that they weren't taking place either. Yes. But Garabandal, Spain, back in the 60s, Mary was appearing to four of the children, and they would all end up in the same place no matter where they were. And then this Marian Apparitions of the 20th Century, which is put out by the Marian Communications just in 1991, so it's a very recent one, even took us over to Zaytun, Egypt in the latter 60s, and that was a radiant light above. I found myself particularly interested in that one, Jim, because the people who gathered there were believers and non-believers. They represented the Orthodox, the Protestant, Muslim, Jews, and Roman Catholic, and again reminded me that Mary is not just a Roman Catholic phenomenon. Mary is the mother of the world and the church at large, so she has every right to appear and to touch.
We probably should put that in some context and so on to understand that statement that you're making there. It probably takes us back, if we look through the history of the church, in the great Eastern churches, Mary has been a very important figure throughout the Eastern rites in the long Orthodox tradition, great sentiment about Mary and devotion to Mary. And then we would look at the Protestant Reformation where you get a counter trend, and that is to say that Mary had become too important. She had taken over the role of Christ, that there wasn't that much about her in the Bible, and we should restrict ourselves and play down the Marian devotion. Right. And then it was also then, as we move into our own time, good to keep in mind that before the Second Vatican Council in the 1950s, as a result of a lot of Fatima and other things, there was tremendous interest theologically in Mary. There were all kind of things written about Mary as co-redemptrix and as the mediatrix of graces and so on. There was what many called a Marian maximalism. That is, the theologians tried to find every possible prerogative and quality of Mary and play it up and intensify it. And that took us up to the time of the Second Vatican Council, 1962, and it began. And one of the key debates in the council really was about Mary. That is, would Mary have a separate document in which those who had played up her many attributes and characteristics would get a chance to make that very clear and flesh it out, or would she be treated in the context of the church? And really one of the few close votes in the whole 4 years of the council occurred on that issue. And only by, as I recall it, a couple hundred votes maybe, or very, I don't remember exactly the numbers, but it was a close vote of the bishops and council, and it was voted that Mary would be seen, treated in the last chapter on the document on the church, that she would not have her own separate document, but would be treated in the context of the church, and, as they said, the prototype of the church, the exemplar of the church. So she would be seen as a model for all Christian people. She would be seen as one who was saved by Christ as we are saved.
Right.
She would be seen as one taken to heaven as we will be taken to heaven one day. She would be seen as a model of faith, as one who would be concerned about the poor and the outcasts as we are called to do. So Mary, prototype of the church, exemplar of the Christian life, became the Vatican II way of putting Mary into context. Well, that's just to put maybe a little historical setting on your comment there, and to see sort of how we got to where we are today, where we are, very interestingly, it seems to me, seeing an upsurge of interest in these apparitions of Mary, and even the secular press takes note of it, because even they put on the front page of the New York Times book review a review of a book about Mary called Encountering Mary by Sandra Zimdars Swartz. So this is a very interesting phenomenon that we're seeing, along with my own pastoral experience of running into more people lately who say the Rosary.
Yes.
Than have been doing that in the recent past.
Likewise. And for anyone who was looking at our church prior to Vatican II, I'm in my 50s right now, so I go back to the 1940s and 50s. If someone was looking, I think they could maybe think that we were worshiping Mary. We really were not, but there were the little elderly ladies with their babushkas on, and my own dear grandmother, who lived to be 91, I say she rosaried her way to heaven, and her comment was, "Susan, stay close to Mary. She's a woman, she'll understand." So, and I think Mary has graciously allowed all of this to occur, but there's such a resurgence right now, Jim. I've become sensitized by looking carefully through this book that you're making reference to, Encountering Mary, but who are we to put stops on what heaven can do on earth? May we be receptive to it. So these apparitions that are told in this video, take us over to Japan, where Sister Agnes Sesagawa has been experiencing apparitions, over to Venezuela. They're taking place even right now. Of course, Medjugorje and Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia, will hopefully be able to reflect on that sometime, into Africa, South Korea, and even the Soviet Ukraine. So it's an hour's program, and it...
what was the video again?
The video is Marian Apparitions of the 20th Century. And
it treats Fatima in Portugal, and that's the one we want to concentrate on here, isn't it? And go back, we've got, the fundamentals of the story. There's 3 shepherd children, Lucia, Francisco, and Jacinta.
Correct.
The names, I guess, became fairly familiar to people. And there's a whole series of appearances, really 6 in number, beginning on Sunday, May 13th, 1917, and occurring on the 13th of the month all the way into October. So 6 major visions that these young people had. I think it's worth noting that the 2 cousins of Lucia died very shortly after the things. They did not live to adulthood at all.
Neither of them did. So the whole legacy really has fallen into the hands of Sister Lucia. I say sister now.
Yeah.
She's in her 80s, and she lives in, I believe it's a Carmelite convent in Portugal. So she's
still alive. She was only 10 years old when these visions started, and evidently she has a good recall of all of these, and at various times has put them, written things down for people to help understand what had been going on. I think there was some preparation for the 1917 events. She had evidently had a strong religious sensibility and was attuned to the mystery dimension of life. And there were other times in which she had some extraordinary experiences with her cousins, even before this particular event in 1917.
Right.
Also might keep in mind that we're dealing with Portugal now, and in that period of time you had some political turmoil, and as a matter of fact there was revolutionary government that was had tried to stamp out religious institutions And so there was a lot of fear connected with this to try to keep it quiet because they weren't sure government officials were too pleased with young people claiming to have seen the Virgin Mary, especially since there was sort of a secularist and even atheistic bent to this government.
That's often the case. I really, even as I look back to La Salette or to Lourdes, the tumultuous political scenes. Right now, for Fatima, we're in the midst of the First World War taking place. And with all of that unrest...
And the other date it brings to mind is, of course, the Russian Revolution, and that becomes tied in very tightly with the secrets connected with Fatima, the general message of the problems with communism and the eventual triumph over communism and great fears connected with it. So you're right, the social context is really crucial here.
Yes. Lucia, as a child, you mentioned she struggled with different turmoil too. Somehow she learned to try to accept submissively that the sacrifices that the Lord will send you. That was kind of a message from her childhood. Little did she dream that the apparitions would enter her life and put it in a total direction that way. But
when you look at that first experience there, I guess it was Jacinta that gave one of the first reports. She told her mother about what happened, and she saw Our Lady, and the Blessed Virgin Mary told her to say the Rosary every day.
That's right.
And then she would take them to heaven, and really, she wasn't supposed to tell anyone because Lucia, her older cousin, had told her not to tell anybody.
But can you picture a little 7 or 8 year old or just trying to keep quiet at something like this? That's almost asking too much.
And she had to tell her mother about it, in which she did. And then we're at this second vision here. Mary appears in an oak tree, evidently. And now you've got other people present because they're onto this thing. And this is a phenomenon of the appearances of the modern times, is that crowds begin to gather and word gets around that there are visionaries, people claiming to have seen the Virgin. And so now the public is involved. They want to see what is happening.
Right.
Oh, we got... She says, evidently the visions used to conclude when Lucia would suddenly stand up and say, look, there she goes. Mary had gone back to heaven, evidently, and you couldn't see them, and couldn't see her anymore.
Evidently, the only awareness of something different was maybe a little movement of the tree, or some of the people who were around said it sounded like a buzzing bee. When Mary would leave. Now that's not been documented, but that's the experience of the people there too. But they prayed the Rosary. That was the message that Our Lady asked, to pray the Rosary every day, and that echoes through the years.
Indeed, and that's a major part of this whole Fatima experience. Evidently, after these visions were going on, and we said there were 6 of them through that summer of 1917, there would get to be a pattern, and the crowds grew. I mean, the children would be there. Lucia would announce that the Virgin is coming, and then they would be wrapped in some sort of ecstasy while kneeling, and then they would stand up and say the Virgin had left and evidently gone towards the east, another familiar religious motif of looking to the east and the religion coming out of the east and so on.
And again, that they got involved in this rigorous cross examinations. I mean, people were not just going to take it sitting down. They were scrutinized galore, and to hold on. I mean, these are young children who are being put on the stand to defend. And in some cases, here and in some other apparitions, people can begin to doubt. If someone comes after you so strongly, you can begin to wonder if it really happened.
Yes, I mean, and this was very close to them. I guess Lucia's own mother gave her a hard time about this, and they tried to, government people would come and try to get her to confess that this was all lies and the devil was behind it and so on. And there was even, I guess, threats of death that were given to these young children to renounce this claim to these apparitions of the Blessed Virgin Mary.
However, I think Mary did share with them, the importance, as we said, of submitting to sacrifice and to make reparation. So my hope would be that they could see some of this distress as a part of winning grace, however it would be, for the intentions that they were praying for.
I found it interesting that Lucia said that she really did not hold resentments against her mother, even though her mother beat her over this and gave her a hard time, that she sort of just accepted all of this. So we should talk a little bit about probably the most famous of all these 6 apparitions, which occurred on October 13th of 1917. And people remember this. I was talking to a young man who said he can remember hearing about this and thinking, wow, the sun danced around and headed for the earth, and he was frightened. He thought, wow, he better shape up and put aside his evil ways and carry on with a better kind of life if this is what was going to happen. So we see that there was sort of a scary side connected with the reports of all of this, and especially as the stories were told over the years, I think it probably got built up and embellished in different ways. But in this occasion, the crowd is there, and I don't remember all the details of this.
Okay, that took place on October 13th, and about 70,000 people gathered at noon.
Oh, my heavens, 70,000?
70,000, in the midst of drenching rains. I mean, the umbrellas are up, and the rain is torrentially coming down, and that sun became a ball of fire, and it seemed to plunge towards the earth. It was about a 12-minute time, and of course no one was harmed, no one was scorched, all things got dried up instantly. So that was the promised miracle, and it has happened. The sun dancing has taken place in other places, but this was the October 13th with 70,000 people.
70,000
right.
people, and many of whom I guess claimed to see this, huh?
True.
That it went through the same experience.
Now, prior to that, I know that's the famous one, but July 13th was an important too, because Mary gave a warning and asked for the consecration of Russia to her Immaculate Heart. In order for peace to come, otherwise errors will spread. But I came on the scene in 1940, so I don't know what happened in the 20s and 30s, but I'm not conscious from reading her book that there was a lot of activity of concern about it until we got into the 40s, got towards the Second World War, and then the memory of what Mary asked us to do, to amend our lives, to pray for the Rosary, to pray for the conversion of Russia.
Let's look, Sue, more carefully at the secrets, because that's what we often associate with Fatima. Are these secrets that were told to the youngsters, and that they were not to tell others, at least initially. And of course, with the death of Francisco and Jacinta, that meant that Lucia was the only one who knew these things, and she held on to them for a good deal of time.
Right.
But then it was between 1935 and 1941 that she began to write these things down. And she wrote 4 memoirs at that time, during that time. And during that, she revealed 2 of the 3 secrets.
That first one was the vision of hell, seeing this great sea of fire and the soul shrieking. I mean, it's a very, very vivid, even just reading about it. You can let your imagination, dwell on that. And the second was the secret that...
So let's just say the first one is a vision of hell and has a very somber kind of thing.
Yes.
I mean, there's sort of the notion connected with it is that, I mean, this is where you're going to go if you don't shape up, right?
I didn't even like reading about it.
Yeah. It's a really strong imagery connected with all that great sea of fire, demons lurking about, souls shrieking, and so on. So you get a tremendous vision of hell and what happens to those who don't shape up and listen to the messages here.
And then the second part of the secret was to establish a devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. And with that commitment, hopefully, that souls would be saved and peace would come, and that the war would come to an end.
Yeah, so we're talking First World War here. So the idea is that indeed this was fulfilled in a sense, that the First World War did come to an end, and after the visions, and so I think that set up a feeling that these secrets could be trusted in some way.
Right, because they were coming to pass.
Yeah, I mean, she's revealing them only later, and so people looking, and she says, well, this is the second secret, really has to do with this whole idea of devotion to the Immaculate Heart, and then if you do that, there'll be peace and war will end. So people are looking back at that in the 40s when this is all coming out and saying, oh, yes, the secret was right, you can trust it, and now we got to know what the third secret was all about.
Before we get to that, though,
I
remember the request of Mary to do the first 5 Saturdays of a month, and for the reparation of sin. And as a child, I can still remember my dad taking my brother and sister and me to the church on Saturday mornings for this. So we were fulfilling that. I had forgotten all about it until I read it in the book Encountering Mary. And I remember as a child just praying that I could be fervent enough that God would really, really help convert sinners or take care of whatever is needed to supplement other people's needs.
There were other things you were supposed to do on this first Saturday. You were supposed to go to Mass and communion, but you were supposed to also go to confession before that and recite 5 decades of the Rosary, and then sort of have a 15 minutes of meditation on the mysteries of the Rosary throughout this time. So that's the whole idea of the Rosary prayer. We've mentioned that before, but the Rosary is a set stylized prayer in which you say Our Father and then you say 10 Hail Marys, and the idea of the prayer is that while you're doing that you are to meditate or reflect, that the Hail Marys become backdrop to meditation, reflection on a particular aspect of the Christian perception of the world. So you might meditate on Christ's resurrection, for example, or on his ascension, or the descent of the Holy Spirit, or the Assumption of Mary. Try to meditate on that while you say the 10 Hail Marys. That's sort of the idea behind that prayer we know as the Rosary. Now, are you going to say something about this third secret and how all of that developed? And
obviously, if we got 2, everybody wants to know the third. And the fact that Lucia was very ill in about 1943, they really wanted to get it forth. But she, I believe, wrote it down and gave it sealed to the chancery, and eventually
this would be to the local bishop's office.
That's the initial process. And any apparition, it has to have clearance in the local level before it would eventually make it to Rome.
I think the theory is here the local bishop really did not read it. He put it in a vault and didn't look at it and just kept it, right?
Right. But it was taken to Rome on April 16th, and I'm sure this is
1957.
Back in 57. That was the anniversary of Bernadette's death, too, from Lourdes, but that's just a happenstance, perhaps. I don't know if it was intended that way. But it was taken, and let me see, who was the Pope at the time? Would have been
Pope Pius the
12th, right. And I guess all of us were waiting for the 1960s. Somehow we thought it would be revealed to us. And I can remember I was in the convent, had just entered, and in 1960 waited for it, and 1960 came and passed, even the last days. So I'm going to pick up from there. Don't remember.
Well, then I think it's still not known exactly what this is it? I think the theory is that the later popes read it, and John the 23rd read it, right? And the current pope read it, and that they have sort of chosen not to say exactly what this third secret is all about.
I think it originally was that it would help spread the cause of communism.
Yeah, there was a fear of that, right. And that's a linkage that you get over and over in all of these apparitions, is the idea of communism. That, I think, was popularized, incidentally, by Bishop Fulton Sheen, who gave a talk, well-known talk. He was linking Fatima with the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. I think the quote was, what will disappear will be a dictator reviewing his troops in the Red Square. What will survive will be a lady reviewing her children in the White Square. So that became sort of a touchstone. I think the way many people interpreted all of this third secret had to do with communism, with its power, and finally the failure of communism, which I must say I run into people today who see the fall of the Soviet Union and the dismantling of the Berlin Wall and the freeing of Eastern Europe linked to this third secret. People will talk like that about all the prayers that went on, maybe are finally fulfilled indeed as they reflect on the meaning of Fatima.
Back when you mentioned about what will disappear will be a dictator reviewing his troops in the Red Square, and what will survive will be a lady reviewing her children in the White Square, that the symbol of the hammer on the red flag would come to look like a cross, and the sickle would come to look like the moon under Mary's feet. And I agree with you, Jim, in terms of so many of the wonderful alterations that have taken place in Eastern Europe. I've used the word happenstance too much. I don't think it's happenstance. I think it's divine direction intervening in very concrete ways, which can be invitations for us to believe and to respond.
I think it's very important to keep a certain theological perspective on all of this. What we're really distinguishing here is public revelation and private revelation. We have, as Christian people, the public revelation given to us in the Bible. It centers on Christ, the mediator for all of us. It gives us all we need to know for salvation, to come closer to God, to be divinized by the great Lord. It has everything we need. These apparitions are thought of as being private revelations. They're the kind of insights gained by individuals who share them with others. Now, there's no need to accept these private revelations. Even within the Catholic community, there's no call that we have to say yes them, affirm them, believe them, or anything else. I think most people just try to see if there's something they can get out of them that would stir up their own faith.
Exactly. And I think that's so important to just want to put an exclamation point to what you've said, that our church doesn't give any guaranteed veracity to the prophetic content of them. I mean, it is not the Word of God, but the response of millions of people to the message. And there's some trust and hope that that third secret may concern an era of peace that we are yearning for and moving towards. And that takes trust. And I guess by participating in this program with you is the conviction for myself to take more seriously what Mary is asking of us.
Well, that's well said, Sue. I appreciate hearing about your own religious sensibilities along that line. We've been looking at Fatima, 1917, a young woman, Lucia, who held secrets for a long time and revealed them to others. It's one of the most famous of all the Marian apparitions, and really invites us to reflect on that distinction between public revelation, which we must all accept, and the private revelations, which could help us in particular cases and according to our own sensibilities.